Thank you all for coming. I'm Dave Wilson with the Scandia Veterans Memorial Committee. Welcome. And, this has been a 5-year process, and we are very, very pleased with the result. It wouldn't happen without you. So thank you. I want to give everybody a round of applause right now. So we have a little program, and we'll also have a reception following. But I want to tell you something before we start our program about a flag that we're going to raise. This is a bicentennial flag donated by someone from the community. And I have to tell you, the last time it flew was on July 4th, 1976. And where it flew was above the United States Capitol building in Washington, D.C.
Wow.
So we are honored to take it today and transfer it to the Veterans Memorial here. So we are ready to start our ceremony. We'll have the national anthem sung by Donald Peterson. And if I could ask you now to stand for the presentation of the colors. Gentlemen. Don, if you mind coming forward to sing the national anthem, and everybody's invited to sing along with Don.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we'd hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we'd watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof to the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, Don. If I could ask Pastor Ron Leslie to come forward for the invocation.
Good morning. Just a couple words before my invocation prayer. When I was thinking about this, I thought about when I was a kid during World War II, and I'd ask my dad, well, where's Uncle Norm? And he said, he's in the service. And it dawned on me that we use the word service about all our veterans and about our military, and it made me want to focus on that word today. I also happened to look in our Lions Club photo directory, and on the back page of that is a list of all of the Lions Club men, and might be women too, I didn't look that close, but who have served in our military. And the word serve is in front of each name. And it also happens to be the motto of Lions International is we serve. So I want to focus on that in our prayer this morning. Dear God, we thank you for the many blessings you have given to each of us in our own ways. We ask you to be with our fellowship this morning. Help us to be humble enough, smart enough, willing enough to serve those who are in need of our care and our service. Amen.
Okay, everyone can be seated, get comfortable, and now we will place the wreath at the memorial. This will be our official dedication to all veterans. As you know, this memorial is dedicated to all veterans, no matter where they're from or when they serve. We dedicate this memorial in the honor of the generations of men and women who have served to defend the liberties that we enjoy today. Those are the words on our granite. And that's what our memorial is all about. So I'm going to ask all council members that are here, the mayor and speakers, please come forward. Committee members, as we take the wreath to the memorial. Okay.
Yeah. Well, listen, crack a joke, man.
Okay, we'll try to speak a little louder into the microphone. I know it's hard to hear in the back there, but it's my honor to introduce our first speaker, the Mayor of Scandia, Mayor Christine Mayevsky.
Can you hear me in the back? Will you raise your hand if you can hear me? Can you hear me in the back? Will you raise your hand if you can hear me? Okay, so some people aren't raising their hand. Am I okay though? Okay, all right. As mayor, and on behalf of the city of Scandia, I welcome you here today for the dedication of the Scandia Scandia Veterans Memorial, at Lily Scogan Park. This memorial pays tribute to men and women who have stepped forward to protect, defend, honor the values of the United States of America. Organized by volunteer members of the Scandia community with all donated money, the memorial took over 4 to 5 years to complete, and the city thanks all involved for this effort. As you will hear again this morning, this memorial is a tribute to veterans past and the present. I would like to briefly share about 2 of them from Scandia. Perhaps one of the oldest soldiers recognized here is Frederick Stutz, who in 1917 bought a cottage along the St. Croix River for his family. They would summer and sometimes spring and fall here. When staying in Scandia, he commuted daily by train into St. Paul for work. At the time, there was a Soo Line railroad platform near the log house landing, and it serviced many of families along the St. Croix who had similar work arrangements as he did. He was a captain in the Spanish-American War, and he saw action in Cuba. Later, in 1918, he organized and headed up the Minnesota National Guard, which was originally named the Minnesota Home Guard. He came out of retirement when he was in his late 60s during World War II to once again serve as a leader in the National Guard. And although when he officially retired in 1945, he had attained the rank of Brigadier General, he was known locally as Colonel Stutz. He was buried with military honors at Fort Snelling. His grandchildren and great-grandchildren continue to this day to summer in their Scandia Otisville cottages, as they have for over 100 years. And on a more personal note, when I was a young woman, I was living through an American time of pain and struggle in dealing with its young men being called upon to defend American values in what was then a controversial war. I had friends who grew up way too fast during this time, as well as a brother who served in the Navy. The pain of that time continues today as we still deal with the lives which have been scarred through injury, lives lost, Scandia's own Barton Johnson among them, and dealing with those who are still missing and who have been injured, and John McCain's recent passing a reminder of that. I recently became reacquainted with a longtime Scandia resident, a Vietnam War veteran, who spoke about how when he was building a home for himself and his family here in the early 1970s, he cultivated and cared for and designed a home in Scandia, and that doing that is what allowed him to heal from the experiences of that war. He showed me around his land, which he had designed beautifully, cultivated, crafted, and cared for over these years. I was fortunate, I was honored actually to have him share this with me. This part of Scandia, and I hope that Scandia, with its inherent beauty, its quintessentially American immigrant experience, and its values of love and respect, has given the opportunity, it gave the opportunity to him and will, through this memorial and others who come to visit here, hope that this memorial will continue to provide that for others here in Scandia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Our next speaker is Randall Simonson. Randall, resident of the community and member of the Memorial Committee. Randall?
It is a great honor to be standing before you on this very special day. This memorial is a special place for all veterans and families. As a veteran, I am proud to be part of a brotherhood of both men and women in arms. This is a brotherhood that has no end. As it says on our memorial and many other locations throughout America, all gave some and some gave all. And these words continue to be true to this very day. As sad as this reality can be, it is even more difficult to see the loss of our brothers and sisters through the taking of their own lives. There are endless possible reasons for this to be happening, but as insignificant as you may believe your efforts to be, when you see a veteran, give them a moment of your time and talk to them and say thank you. It is that one moment in time that you could just be saving a life and not even realize it. Why is this important? We have heard and perhaps even witnessed the times in our country's history when our returning veterans were not respected and were treated horribly. After returning from war, many of us didn't have a parade or even receive a thank you. Sometimes we were just ignored. Our country has called upon the veteran to do the unthinkable for our freedoms that we so greatly enjoy, and yet wonder why our cousins, grandparents, aunts or uncles, sisters or brothers, mothers and fathers don't share with us their story. Sometimes their stories can be so painful and also unrelatable that they feel it would be easier to keep it buried because no one would understand. Plus, some operations that they have participated in could never be revealed to anyone, forcing them to carry an endless burden forever. Hard to imagine that someone can keep a secret like that when gossip, rumors, and false stories seem to be in the landscape of American society today. When asked to name a war that you remember, common responses are World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq. But the reality is that America's men and women in our history have served in many operations abroad. There are two issues. Not everything has been declared as a war, and not every deployment has been given recognition. Both still have the same outcome, and both are just as dangerous. Our nation's military have been serving in hundreds of operations abroad, and we don't even realize it. It is an honor to see all the men and women here today that are brothers and sisters in arms, or a family member, or a friend of a veteran. I can assure you that there are people sitting next to you today that have a story to tell. As you may know, our theme for this memorial is that every brick has a story. So it is our responsibility to reach out and seek to hear their stories. Some learn history in books or in the classroom, but you have a vast history to be learned in the people around you or at home. Don't miss out on the opportunities that are before you to learn from them. I recently had an opportunity to hear a story from an older veteran at the VA hospital. He seemed pleased to have someone to talk to and to listen. Here is his story. He told me about his past. When he was a SEAL during the Vietnam, and he said police action, he told me when part of his team, which was 4 persons, arrived back in the U.S. at the airport, they were spit upon, yelled at, and screamed at, with all sorts of profanities, and to include being a baby killer and other horrific remarks. He told me his team members couldn't take it any longer. They dropped their bags and gear on the floor, jumped the divider, and went on to beat the accusers and sent 15 of them to the hospital with injuries. The police showed up and took the Navy SEALs to the police station. When they arrived at the station, the police chief asked them what kind of pizza they liked. They asked the chief, "Are you not going to charge us and arrest us?" And the police chief said, "No, I don't even know you or who you are, and I don't want to know. What kind of pizza do you like?" So they told the chief. The police chief got the pizza and gave it to us, and we ate until we were full. The police chief then brought us back to the airport and helped us find a flight to get back to where we were heading, and said goodbye and thanked us for our service. Perhaps this makes a great story. As I could see, this was a kind man, but he had seen things that he will never forget. This memorial may be modest in size, but it is part of a much greater memorial that spans across the world. We are here to ensure that in our small community of this vast world, that the veteran is never forgotten, and that there is a special place for you to remember how valued you are. So I stand here before you as a veteran and an American. I want to say thank you to all of you for your sacrifice and service, for keeping our country free and the flame bright in the hand of Lady Liberty, for supporting and defending the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I salute you. It is now my great honor to introduce to you Representative Bob Detmer.
Well, thank you. And did I just see some snowflakes come down? Wonderful. First of all, when I get up and speak at veterans organizations, I am a veteran, a 25-year Army Reserve veteran, deployed for 2 years after 9/11. And my wife and I are proud parents of twin sons that are West Point graduates. Both have had 4 deployments in Iraq, Afghanistan, and they're both safely back in America here. One's out in Washington, D.C., and the other one's out in Fort Hood, Texas area. And I always tell people when our sons come home with grandkids, we had 7 grandkids, and I have to salute my sons. They're lieutenant colonels, and I'm a chief warrant officer, retired. So they have rank on me. And but I say when you come home with the grandkids, I'm commander-in-chief when my wife Colleen is not here. So, but we're proud of our family. We also have a daughter that's a 911 dispatcher for Washington County for the sheriff. But first of all, I'd like to just ask, who am I speaking to here? I think I saw some World War II veterans here. Would you raise your hand? Well, one. Thank you, sir, for your service. Let's give him a hand. My father is 95 years old. He's served during World War II. Still lives in his home. We're just proud of that generation. It's a wonderful generation. And we could probably, all of us, say here that, in fact, I was speaking at the Minneapolis Veterans Home about 6 years ago, and a Korean War veteran came up to me and said, Representative Detmer, did you know that this is the first year that there are no World War I veterans alive in America or Canada? That whole generation is gone. And we have 5 veterans homes in Minnesota, and we in the Minneapolis Veterans Home, there's about 50 World War II veterans that are still in the Minneapolis Veterans Home. And you look at the Korean War veterans, and now we're seeing our Vietnam War veterans entering our veterans nursing homes. But I was asked to talk today about why do we have veterans memorials? You see them all over the country. The simple answer is to honor, as was mentioned before by the other speakers, to honor the men and women who have served our country, and especially those who have died in battle in wars that our nation's history. Well, let's take a real closer look at why we have veterans memorials. And let's take a look at the history of our memorials in America. There might be a more refined answer that we're looking at. And also, who else do we have here today? How many here have served in the Army? Raise your hand. Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard. Sometimes we don't see any Coast Guard people. But those are people that have served and have left their families many times. Minnesota became a state in 1858. Less than 3 short years later, America was embroiled in the Civil War. Minnesota played an early part and a significant role for the Union in the efforts of the war. The Minnesota State Capitol that I'm honored to serve in, dedicated just 40 years after the end of the U.S. Civil War, is a museum honoring the volunteer armies and the military leaders who fought for the Union in the war, as well as being a seat of state government where the legislature makes laws and the Supreme Court interprets laws. If you tour the state capitol, I would probably say most of you here have toured the state capitol, you will see numerous flags and remnants of the Civil War, as well as plaques dedicated to the many of the Minnesotans who served in the infantry regiments, statues of the Civil War, of generals who fought and died in the Civil War. They chronicle the Minnesota involvement in the Civil War, as well as honoring the men in the young state who served the Union during the war. World War I ended 100 years ago. More than 118,000 Minnesotans served in the war to end all wars, and 3,600 men died in the war for Minnesota. The veterans who served in World War I were hailed as the heroes to help end the war in Europe. Local communities erected their monuments to their native sons who served. The attack on Pearl Harbor, later in 1941. Americans' involvement in World War II. More than 300,000 men and women were inducted in the armed forces at Fort Snelling. And more than 326,000 Minnesotans served during World War II. But World War II was so significant because every U.S. civilian was asked to sacrifice, not just those that served in the military, to support the war at home. Minnesotans, 2.5 million residents, planted victory gardens so that farm fields were being able to send things overseas to our soldiers. Children collected recyclables. Women entered the workforce at record numbers and took jobs that had traditionally gone to men who were now called away for service. Minnesota World War II Memorial in St. Paul opened up in 2007. One of the panels of the Minnesota World War II memorials pays tribute to the civilians at home who did their part to aid in the war effort. 5.8 million people served during the Korean War, and more than 36,000 died, including 8,200 missing in action or buried at sea. The Minnesota Korean War Memorial opened up in 1998. There were two aspects of the Minnesota Korean War Memorial that are unique and different from the prior war memorials. The soldier in the Korean War Memorial is symbolically searching for his lost unit and missing soldiers, and pays homage to those who serve and missing in action. The memorial also lists the names of 700 Minnesotans who died during the war. The Vietnam War, as was mentioned earlier, was vastly unpopular among the general public, and the veterans of the Vietnam War returned home were shunned and mistreated. The National Vietnam War Memorial, dubbed as the War That Heals, lists every name of more than 58,000 Americans who gave their life in the Vietnam War or are missing in action. This aspect of the memorial makes it far more personal to those who lost a soldier that served with them, a family member, a friend, than would a generic memorial dedicated to the fallen. In addition to serving as a very personal memorial to veterans and families of service members killed in the Vietnam War, the Wall That Heals has helped thousands of Minnesota veterans named to mend the emotional wounds of the Vietnam War and the treatment they received on returning home. The Minnesota Vietnam Veterans Memorial also lists the names of all 1,120 Minnesotans who were killed or missing in action in the war. In 1996, the Vietnam Memorial's fund sponsored by the traveling replica of the traveling Vietnam War that travels around the country and have visited over 400 different communities around the country. It was in Minnesota in June and was visited by many Vietnam War veterans and their family members. Many people leave mementos and artifacts and flowers at the base of the wall beneath the name of the service member as a very personal memorial to the fallen. Earlier this month, September 11th, marked the 17th anniversary of the Al-Qaeda terrorist attacks against the United States, and thus began the global war on terrorism, which has seen U.S. troops fight battles in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Somalia. The war on terror is still on today. We must not forget that, and has become the longest war in our nation's history. On a personal note, as I mentioned before, our twin sons have had 4 deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Last year, Congress unanimously passed a bill that was signed by the President Trump approving the construction of the National War Memorial on Global War on Terrorism, and exempts it from the 10-year waiting period from a war's end before a memorial can be built. I didn't know there was a 10-year waiting period, but that's been wiped out. Many communities and towns across America have chosen, like Scandia, to erect veterans memorials to honor all veterans, including those who served during peacetime. These memorials provide a place for the veterans to reflect. I see there's benches here. People can sit down here and look at your wall and reflect. They also tie together generations of veterans who served in different wars. During peacetime, during the global war on terrorism, that has no end yet in sight. So why, I'll get back to why we build veterans memorials. In addition to honoring the men and women who served in the military, especially those who gave their lives in defense of our country, they also honor the servicemen and women who are still missing in action, and pay tribute to the veterans who have served our country during peacetime. Memorials also serve an important historic function. They document the events of a war, the cultural era during which that war was fought. They illustrate the importance of how the war shaped the nation's and the state's history and a community. Memorials are also important to remind as reminders of the sacrifices that families and the entire communities that they went through during the war. Memorials can have a profound, deep power to heal the emotional wounds of the war, many of which stay with veterans long after the war. Memorials also serve a place where very personal remembrances to the fallen and the missing can be connected to the veteran from his fellow soldiers, family members, and friends. Finally, veterans memorials are a place where veterans from different generations, as we have different generations here, who served their country during different times can gather, reflect, and where they share the common bond. That bond being their willingness to fight and defend and give their lives if necessary, to preserve the freedoms we Americans enjoy. And they represent a strong, patriotic character does matter, of a community like Scandia, Minnesota. The last thing I'd like to share with you was given to me by a Korean War veteran while I was getting ready to speak at Minneapolis Veteran Home. It's just titled as The Veteran, and you probably have heard this before. Remember, it is a veteran, not the preacher, who has given us the freedom of religion. It is a veteran, not the reporter, who's given us the freedom of press. It is a veteran, not the poet, who's given us the freedom of speech. It is the veteran, not the protester, who has given us the freedom to assemble. It is the veteran, not the lawyer, who has given us the right to a fair trial. It is the veteran, not the politician. I repeat that. It is the veteran, not the politician, who has given us the right to vote. Remember, it is the veteran who salutes the flag, who serves under the flag, and whose coffin is draped by the flag. God bless our veterans. May God continue to bless America. Thank you.
Thank you for those very excellent words. Now, for a benediction, Chaplain Hillman.
As I sit and observe and listen to what's being done here, I'm reminded of three biblical statements of Christ. The first one is, "Do this in remembrance of me." It's found in the book of John. The other one is, "When two or more are gathered in his name, so shall his presence be among them." And the third one that is basically lays the foundation of our nation's stability, our faith and hope, is the phrase is the passage where he says, "No greater love hath he than he who lays his life down for a friend." And that's why we're here, folks. That's why we're here. Today we acknowledge these men and women who have done their military service, gave of their time, gave of their strengths, gave their ambitions, and even of their lives. Many of our soldiers carry scars in the hearts and memories, as well as their bodies. Dark memories haunt them at night. As a spiritual psychologist, I have worked with hundreds of veterans. And I'm here to tell you, folks, these memorials far exceed anything that a medication or a therapist couch can do in healing those issues that our veterans are struck with. Jesus came to mankind with a promise that he can deliver. He can deliver the pain with a promise of abundant life to our veterans. He bore this on the cross. He promised to bear our sorrows, our brokenness, if we only put our trust in him. His sacrifice was meant to exchange their wounds for joy and peace of a future that is unhindered by any kind of fate. This gift is granted to the veterans of our nation who bear both the tangible and the intangible scars. These memorials and him, being our Lord, can heal. God tells us that not everything that happens to us in life is necessarily good. He does assure us that all things work together for those who are in line with his love and with his purpose. He creates good in families. He creates good in veterans. He creates good in anyone who's experienced the pain of loss. We should pray daily for the blessing to deliver unto those people their needs for quality of life. I'd like to take this moment to kind of expand on the mayor's. My wife and I recently discovered a young man. His name is Melvin T. Kresh. He was a chief petty officer of the United States Navy. He called his hometown Marine on St. Croix. He was a career sailor. His plane went down. He was deployed served on a carrier in the Vietnam War. His plane went down when he was sent on a mission to recover a downed pilot. His remains were never recovered. He's listed on the Vietnam War casualty, as a Vietnam War casualty on the wall in D.C. My wife and I wish to sponsor a brick in his memory. Would we all stand? And we're going to stand in a moment of silent vigil. There are more than 15, I think the exact number is about 17, of Minnesota veterans, servicemen whose remains have not been returned to their family. Their presumption of death, but the remains are still unrecovered. So let's take a moment in silent prayer. Lord Jesus, we honor our veterans today in your name. We thank you as we thank them for their sacrifice. We are in prayer today that you grant them the favor of your blessings, a gift that we cannot offer. We pray for you to give our veterans a peace that goes far beyond the peace that they sought and sacrificed to secure, a peace in their own hearts, wrapped in the joy of a life touched by your strong and loving hand. These things we pray in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And all God's people said, Amen. Thank you. I believe that concludes. No?
All right, that concludes our dedication ceremony, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. I invite you all, I encourage you all to come to the community center As you know, every brick does have a story behind it, and those stories are posted around the walls and the inside of the main room of the community center for you to see. You can't miss this. There's also warm coffee there, and cake as well. So please join us there and continue the celebration of this memorial. I want to thank all of our speakers, and again, thank all of you for coming here this morning. And yes, there are some snowflakes in the air, but we're tough. We're tough here. All right, thank you. We'll see you at the community center.
Yes,